The gray skies stretched endlessly like a sinister veil above a rock jutting out of the cold navy blue ocean 16 kilometers off the coast of Iceland. 3 men had landed on the only side of this rock that was accessible to such incursions. They crept slowly through a vast colony of black guillemots that stained the islet white with their guano. Ahead of the men stood 2 birds that towered above the rest. They were what the men had come for. The men opened their arms and pounced. One bird dashed into a corner, trapped and easy to capture. The other one went for the cliff, but one hunter intercepted just before the auk jumped off into the sea. He took the unfortunate bird by the neck and began strangling his victim. The commotion had disturbed the guillemots, which burst into a whirlwind of black and white beating wings. The 3rd man walked where the 2 birds had been standing before the peace was broken. At his feet was a large, speckled egg. He lifted his boot and crushed it, the bright yellow yolk oozing across the cold rock. The life was choked out of the last Great Auk pair, the final Great Auk egg destroyed, a species gone in a moment of savagery. The extinction of the Great Auk had been a long time coming, once a reasonably common sight throughout the North Atlantic with potentially a population in the millions. These large black and white flightless birds are in fact the origin of the word penguin, which the flightless seabirds of the southern hemisphere were named after by Europeans. This recognizability only hints at the significance these birds had to many North Atlantic cultures. Neanderthals were hunting them 100,000 years ago, and more recently the people of the maritime Archaic cultural complex living in what is today Newfoundland have been found to have been buried with Great Auk bones, and it seems they created clothes from these birds' skins nearly 4,000 years ago. They held significance to the colonial Europeans thousands of years later as well, who could figure out where in the world they were, as large numbers of them sighted in the ocean meant they were arriving upon the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. This importance and relative abundance is probably why they somehow ended up in the 2014 Ubisoft game Assassin's Creed Rogue, which made me excited about this game because I think it should be noted that all a game has to do to convince me I want to play it is to put a recently extinct species in there. But how did this bird go from a common sight everywhere between Newfoundland and Norway to a bird only remembered in the halls of museums, drawings, or this plush Great Auk? Yes, I also have a dodo and passenger pigeon. As stated, Great Auks had been hunted for at least 100,000 years by hominids. Why couldn't they handle it longer and survive to today? Some have suggested a climatic event known as the Little Ice Age, a slight trend of colder temperatures that occurred roughly between the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution, caused a population decline. The colder temperatures caused slightly lower sea levels, letting predators access the islands the auks bred on. However, current research seems to suggest the birds were not at risk of extinction leading up to humans suddenly hunting them on an industrial scale come the early 16th century. Great Auk colonies were decimated across the range. It seems the demand for down was a major contributor, as auk feathers were second only to eider, and the bird made good fishing bait. European colonies were mostly eliminated by the end of the 16th century. In North America, they were mostly gone by the early 19th century. Soon, it was only the birds found on isolated rocks in the rough seas. The last bird in Great Britain was captured on a tiny Scottish islet in 1840, where the bird was tied up by human captors for a few days, until a violent storm hit and, thinking the bird must be a witch, proceeded to beat the bird to death. Because of course they did. Then, they were only found around Iceland. The last Iceland colony once bred on an island inaccessible to humans. However, nature dealt a hand that would see the end of the species. Iceland is a geologically active place, and this final refuge of the birds was destroyed in an 1830 volcanic eruption. The birds survived and relocated to the island of Elde. Unlike their previous colony, this island could be accessed by hunters, and as soon as the last 50 birds were discovered in 1835, hunters rushed to the rock to collect these birds, which were sought after by museums, hoping to secure a specimen before other museums could. This continued until there was but one pair left, who were killed on that cold June 1844 day. I think there is enough evidence to support the claim that human hunting alone caused the extinction of the Great Auk. Humans went out and slaughtered every one of these birds we could get our hands on, and one by one each colony across the North Atlantic was extinguished. But what about other bird species now extinct we also point to as examples of hunting eliminating an entire species from Earth? How much of a role did hunting by humans play in their extinctions? No story of extinction is as haunting as the disappearance of the passenger pigeon. Once the most numerous bird in the world, with some 3 to 5 billion individuals, migrating in flocks that blotted out the sun and came through with the force of a tornado, as they followed masting of acorns and fruit of trees across eastern North America, breaking branches under their combined weight when they landed to roost. European guns were devastating to these birds, with even amateur marksmen able to shoot down 6 in a single shotgun blast, and the best hunters able to kill around 60 if they were roosting. As the guns continued to blast, the flocks dwindled until the population became too small to continue the species. They disappeared from the wild, but a few were bred in captivity. However, this was not enough to continue the lineage. Sometime in the early morning of September 1st, 1914, the last living passenger pigeon, a captive female named Martha at the Cincinnati Zoo, died. If the passenger pigeon could be wiped out, then any species can be driven to extinction by the action of man. However, hunting was not the only part of the story. At the same time pigeons died with each gunshot into the sky, North American ecology was undergoing a rapid shift. Eastern North America was being deforested at an astounding rate, with vast swaths of the oak, beech, and chestnut trees these birds depended on for feeding, nesting, and roosting, cut down for the United States' expanding agricultural and fuel needs. Out-of-control hunting, in conjunction with widespread deforestation, created the perfect synergistic conditions for the most numerous species on Earth to vanish rapidly. Also helped along by lack of action by local and federal governments, who kept claiming it wasn't a problem, and protesters whining about not being able to murder as many pigeons as they wanted, which greatly increases my climate anxiety. It's happening again, except now it's the whole planet. At roughly the same time, a little further south, the most northerly distributed parrot in the world, the Carolina parakeet, was also declining. This bird too was hunted, often shot as a pest, and because they were a parrot, highly social birds, they would return to fallen flock mates, meaning hunters could wipe out an entire flock by just waiting for them to return after each salvo of gunshots. However, it seems that like the passenger pigeon, hunting was on top of rampant deforestation, and even the introduction of the European honeybee, which took over potential nest sites. Then there is the Huia of New Zealand, a wonderfully strange bird noted for the radically different beaks of males and females, allowing the two to forage in completely different places and thus not compete. Museums wanting them for both illustrating such striking sexual dimorphism and because imperialists believed European fauna superior and would fully conquer the colonized lands of the world, so they rushed to catalog these inferior forms of life before their inevitable extinction. Then things somehow got worse when the not yet King George V visited New Zealand in 1901 and was gifted a Huia feather by a Maori guide, the feathers of the Huia being significant in Maori culture. This gesture led to a craze in both New Zealand and Europe of people trying to emulate the royal fashion. The Huia was last seen in 1907. Again, this is not a case of hunting alone causing the extinction. Old-growth forests which these birds needed to forage in were clear-cut, while mammalian predators were introduced and reduced recruitment. With these combined threats, the Huia soon was only a memory, a few feathers and dusty specimens, which of course are still valuable, and there have been robberies of museums to obtain Huia feathers, which have sold at auction for over $6,000. I wanted to finish up this discussion of the factors that drove birds to extinction and what role human hunting had with perhaps the most famous extinct bird, the dodo. These gigantic, aberrant, flightless pigeons were endemic to the Indian Ocean island of Mauritius. The island was visited several times by Arabian sailors in the Middle Ages and the Portuguese in the early 1500s. However, the island was first colonized by the Dutch in the 1590s, who found a population of large flightless birds lacking fear of humans, as no predators existed on the island, which led to a misconception that the bird was dumb and helped create this image of a fat, ungainly bird, which may have also been helped by overfed captive birds taken back to Europe and held in menageries. Dodo were actually quite muscular birds capable of running quite fast, just not aware that the new arrivals wanted to eat them. The species declined during the Dutch colonial era, with the last sightings on an offshore islet off Mauritius's coast in 1662. The Dutch colony would only last a few more decades itself. The island was abandoned in 1710. The thing is, human hunting probably had little to do with the extinction. Instead, it was the introduction of new species as part of the colonization that probably decimated the dodo. The introduction of pigs, and for some reason monkeys, was devastating, as they could consume the single large egg dodos are thought to have laid, and without recruitment of new birds into the population, the species slowly dwindled to extinction as humans captured a few here and there, not the wholesale slaughter the previous species all had to contend with. These invasive species apparently got so bad that a contemporary British newspaper claimed the Dutch had abandoned the colony because the monkeys ate everything on the island. Which, I guess, what goes around comes around? So as you can see, many examples of extinct birds show that hunting rarely causes extinctions alone. The effects of overexploitation, along with habitat loss or invasive species, work synergistically to cause the decline of these species. Many threatened species today face multiple threats, whether elephants dealing with habitat loss and rampant poaching, or rare amphibians facing climate change, novel diseases, and collection for the pet trade. Combined threats, at least looking back on the history of recent extinctions, seems to be far more devastating than any single threat. However, with the example of the Great Auk, it seems that humans can cause the extinction of a common, widespread species through hunting alone, and today other species have declined drastically, not because of habitat loss or the introduction of an invasive species, but because humans are harvesting them at an unsustainable level. The closest thing to the wholesale slaughter that did in the Great Auk today is probably the decimation of large marine predators due to bycatch and the shark finning industry. In 1969, it was thought the most numerous large animal on the planet was likely the oceanic whitetip shark. These opportunistic predators once literally filled the ocean, and so gained a bit of a reputation for attacking survivors of shipwrecks and downed planes, because you were bound to bump into a few if you ended up in the water. In 2004, a research team took another look at the population of this species and found a decline of over 99% in the Gulf of Mexico and North Atlantic. This was shocking, and while some scientists called this out as overly pessimistic, the authors did reevaluate their work and found they could still stand by their initial assessment. This dramatic decline prompted the IUCN to list the species as critically endangered. The trouble with oceanic whitetip and other pelagic sharks is that they live out in international waters where it is impossible to regulate fishing without the global community getting on board, because we don't seem to be losing our appetite for seafood, and so the future of this beautiful shark is very uncertain. The thing, though, is consumers can affect this in large enough numbers. Vote with your dollar to save pelagic megafauna like these sharks, cetaceans, and turtles. Research what fish you are eating, use the Seafood Watch app, and actually look up if a company's claims on the packaging about dolphin safe or sustainability are real. Many species can be sustainably harvested, but when profits come before respecting nature and these populations, they get over-harvested and decline. We need to make a stand today so that other species do not go the way of the Great Auk. If you want to learn more about over-harvesting and how wildlife is exploited, check out this video I did on the subject. Or if you want to look at the complex factors that can cause an extinction, watch my video on the extinction of the golden toad.